Relieve your eyes from stress. Let your ears and mind entertain you. Listen to an immersive audio movie podcast only on Stories for the Ears. A new story every month. Deep inside a forest, an old woman finds a lost dog. She takes on an adventurous trek to help the dog get back to his master. When they arrive, the old woman is imprisoned by the police as they find out her true identity. Uncover the mysterious truth behind the old woman's conviction. This is Wanted No More. A young man and his beloved dog camped in the forest. The dog was a retired canine soldier. They were best of friends and always together. They enjoyed being outdoors. While on a trek, the young man slips and falls down a rocky hill. He manages to call the emergency services before losing consciousness. His legs were heavily bruised and bleeding. The dog was standing by him, alone and helpless. A few hours later, the dog sensed some movement in the woods. He saw a human on the other side of the hill. He barked in distress, but the human on the other side did not respond. The dog sprints across the forest, through the valley to get to the human on the other side. He finds an old woman living by herself deep inside the forest. The dog was continuously barking in distress, wagging his tail, wanting the woman to follow. The old woman realized there was an emergency. She agrees to follow the dog. She was slow and struggled to get across the valley. She had not seen a dog like that in years. The dog was well trained and waited for her every step of the way. Halfway through their journey, they hear a helicopter. The emergency services had found the injured, unconscious man and airlifted him to the nearby hospital. The dog sprinted towards the helicopter, but he was too late. He was left behind. The dog was whining and barking at the sky. He wanted to get back to his master. The old woman tried to comfort the dog. She couldn't speak. She was dumb. They trekked through the valley again, back to the old woman's house. The dog had nowhere else to go and stayed with her. She put up a campfire and roasted some meat for the dog. The dog couldn't eat as he had lost his appetite. She comforted the dog as they snuggled to sleep together in her bed. The next morning, the dog had wandered off into the forest. He traced back their trek route with scent and found the campsite where he and his master had stayed the night before. He stood there and barked continuously. The old woman heard the dog barking in distress again. She followed the dog's voice and reached the camp. She found the man's leftover belongings. Among them was the man's purse with a court identity card. The man was a lawyer. The old woman was surprised. She was also a lawyer back in the day. The nearby town was 20 kilometers trek through the woods. In the old woman's pace, it's a whole day's trek. She felt pity for the dog and decided to help. They packed what they wanted from the campsite and started walking towards the town. The dog manages to chase and hunt down a rabbit. He was a well-trained hunter. The old woman was a good archer too. She shot down a few birds with her slingshot. It was dark and they settled down for the night. The dog was hungry and whining. The old woman cooked the meat on fire and fed the dog. She was falling in love with the dog. She enjoyed his company. The old woman had been living in the wild, away from all human contact for over 10 years. She didn't want the urban life. She only wanted to help the dog get back to his master. A lot would have changed since she had left the urban life. She was going to see tomorrow how the new world will treat her. They reached the town the next morning. The woman knew where to find the man. There was only one hospital in the town. As they arrived, the dog found his master's scent and rushed into the hospital. It was chaos as the dog ran through the narrow corridors of the hospital. The security ran behind the dog, trying to chase him away. He found his master, resting on the bed, semi-conscious, hooked to a ventilator. The dog jumped over the bed with his dirty paws and turned the bed all muddy. The security arrived and started beating the dog with their batons. The old woman came to the rescue and escorted the dog out of the hospital. She calmed the dog down while the security questioned and accused her for the chaos. The police and the animal rescue arrived. They took them both into the custody. The woman couldn't talk or respond to the questioning. She tried to explain to the police that she was dumb. She wrote her response on a paper. "My name is Mary Edward. I am a 60-year-old woman wanted for murder," she wrote. The police were in shock. They had been looking for her for over 10 years. She was wanted for murder of a local drug lord, Emmanuel Reed. Back in the day, Mary Edward was a well-known lawyer. She used her skills to defend cases for influential people, criminals, and drug lords. The victims and the opposition hated her as she would find creative ways to win her argument, knowing the sins caused by the very people she defended. Her last case was of a drug lord, Emmanuel Reed. She couldn't defend him. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for all the illegal activities. He managed to escape from the police the same day and went into hiding. He was hiding in Mary's apartment, in a secret underground room built for purpose. It was filled with food, drugs, and everything else that is required for survival. The man felt invincible after he found out the police couldn't find him when they checked. A few days later, Mary and Emmanuel argued over settlements and relocation from the secret room. The arguments turned physical as the man punched Mary's face multiple times. One of his punches landed on Mary's neck. She lost her voice instantly. She found a sharp object and used it to defend herself. She accidentally clipped Emmanuel's neck and ended up killing him. Mary was an accomplice and held drugs in her possession. There was no way she could fight her case on the grounds of self-defense. She had even lost her voice. Fearing the consequences, she escaped into the woods, never to return again. Back to the present day, the man in the hospital has recovered. He was made aware of the current situation. He went to the animal shelter to get his dog back. He visited Mary in the prison. He mentioned to her that he knew her very well. A lot of her cases from the past were included as case studies for new students. He agreed to defend the case for her. On the day of the trial, she was in the court again after all those years, but only this time she was the fugitive. In her case, the police had not recovered the murder weapon. There was no proof for Mary's involvement in the murder, except the fact that she disappeared after the event. He justified her disappearance against conspiracy to murder. He proved that Mary was held as a hostage in her own apartment during that time. She was a victim of physical abuse due to which she had lost her voice. Emmanuel continued to run his operations from Mary's house and had constant visitors. The murderer could have been anyone, and the case will forever remain a mystery. Due to the lack of conclusive evidence against Mary, she was released. Mary Edward was no more on the police most wanted list. She hugged the dog and cried uncontrollably. If it wasn't for him, Mary would have gone to her grave as a murderer. She wrote a note on paper, thanking the lawyer for help. She invited him and his beloved dog to her house in the woods. They trekked back to the woods together and spent the night in Mary's house. Thank you for listening to this episode of Stories for the Ears. Follow us to be notified on our next big story. Please consider sharing this with your friends and family. Until next time, this is Rakesh signing off.